you were challenged about. So if taxes go away, then would the money completely lose its value?
And I said yes.
And you said yes, and I would say, okay, first of all, if taxes go away,
it would probably have some momentum first.
If taxes go away, there's still fines that are billed in this unit of account. There's still import fees that are billed in this money. That's in fact how the government used to fund itself early on.
So I'm glad. Hold on. I'm glad you brought this up. When he said taxes, I was including all of that in my mind.
Yeah.
But this is an important distinction to make.
Right. So if all these things go away, the government doesn't charge anything to anyone anymore, then we still have the fact that we have a banking system, that people owe money to the banks, the government banks, the government banking system, if you remember, we just said it. So because the system is so far along, you have a system with bank loans that are enforced by the state.
That's interesting.
So even if all taxes went away, you would still have a banking system that's enforced through the loans are enforced through punishment by the state.
Right, you can get sued.
Right, so even then, you still have a drain on the money. So that's one way to look at it.
You still have a demand for the money. You still have a demand.
You still have a demand for the money, for the interest, and to repay the loans at the end of the day.
Just stepping back, I want to agree with the point that you made, which is, I said I think that the dollar would lose value, but you pointed out this other thing that even without the taxes, there's through the banking system, there's still a demand to pay your loan back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point.
Right. So that would still be there. So, but yeah, it's a good point that he brings up. And if there was no banking system, if it was a super primitive economy like the one we explained, where it starts with the state spending money into existence, and no banking system exists yet, then, and actually that has happened. There have been some hyperinflations historically that were caused by the state's inability to collect. I think there was one in the U.S.
There's two in the U.S.
U.S.
One technically wasn't the U.S. anymore. It was the Confederate States of America. Yeah.
Well, the Continental dollar, I think.
So there was the Revolutionary Continental dollar, and my understanding on that one, there was three big things that hit it. First of all, like you just said, there was no reasonable taxing authority. Second is it was in the middle of a war, so obviously productive capacity was a little bit stinted when everybody's changing sides and killing one another. Yeah. And the third, and this is a big one that I read from Steven Zarlinga's book, The Lost Science of Money, that the British had a counterfeit operation going off the shore of Boston or off the shore of New York in a boat. So they were just printing them off like crazy. So there was an active counterfeiting operation going on in order to devalue these things. So that had three things going against it. And to the point that you just made, where, with the U.S. dollar right now, there's a lot of, it's entrenched. We've all been using it for 250 years, right? Whereas with the Continental, they just introduced it in this brand new country that's in active rebellion, and everybody's like, are these people going to make it?
Right. No.
Right. And the second one was the Confederate States of America. And my understanding, my cursory understanding of this, is that because the federal government was so weak, they couldn't enforce the taxes, and it was also in active war state. The production was obviously down. All the men were off fighting, and everything was getting destroyed because the armies were marching in, and all that sort of stuff. I don't know anything about an active counterfeiting operation, but yeah, no taxing authority.
Well, yeah. So history. There's good evidence for good historical evidence for MMT, for MMT's origin story throughout history. Right. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that the story panned out exactly that way. That there's a general who imposes a tax and now he needs money. in some cases, there may have already been a banking system, merchant-run banking system, co-opted by the state to some extent. The Islamic banking system, according to Graeber, was
merchant-run. Yeah,
was more privately run. So it's not always perfect. It does go back to the credit theory of money, right? Because you can have a merchant banker who's not the state, but who's constantly got money coming in, going out, who can operate as a bank technically, because he just has this inflow of money. So it's always money available to make available to other people in the form of loans, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different ways to set up a banking system, and it's not always a perfect origin story, but I think it's a very good tool to understand today's banking system. And by the way, it also seems to check out, like whenever there's a prediction that we make based on what goes on, I think the MMT approach has a pretty good track record of helping you understand the mechanics behind the system, that making better predictions from that.
Well, I also, going back to the historical evidence for supporting MMT, something I want to look more into is the story of Alexander Hamilton. He usually gets thrown under the bus, particularly in Austrian circles, because he was, the anti-Jefferson who lost the duel, and is pretty much responsible for the creation of the federal government, or at least various institutions within the federal government.
Right.
And he was the one who was like, we need to have a national debt. And everybody now is like, oh my God, that's such a horrible thing. Why would anybody be so stupid as to want a national debt, right? But again, I've used this like the fourth time I've used this word so far in the show. My cursory understanding of Alexander Hamilton is he took a look at the situation, because the war was just over, and all these different forms of war bonds and continentals and different types of money and different stuff going to all these different countries was just flying around, and there was this big argument going over, should we honor the financial promises or debts that we made at all? Should we honor them 100%? Should we honor these countries but not those countries? Should we offer 50% for this country and 75%? There was this huge conversation of what to do with all this money, and Alexander Hamilton, or not money, but debt. Alexander Hamilton came along and said, accept them all at par. All of them. And his reasoning behind that was, again, my minimal amount of information here, was that as soon as he did that, all that stuff that had been created during the war is now a circulating currency. Did that make sense? Did you follow me on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he knew that okay, if we don't accept the stuff at par, the entire nation is going to lose its credit on the entire world stage. So let's accept it all at par. We now have credit moving forward because we'll accept all the debts that we'll make good on all the debts that we offered. And because we make good, that piece of paper that somebody had that got printed is now valuable. It can be traded.
Yeah. The question is, what does it mean if you have different units, different currencies? What does at par even mean?
No, I didn't mean to say different currencies. I mean to say like different, like, okay, we paid war bonds to the soldiers, and we offered bonds to the Netherlands, or we offered bonds to I don't know the specifics of where all these things were offered out, but there was all these different financial arrangements that got put into place, and I'm sure part of the argument was, well, we gave money to that country, but they didn't end up helping us, so we shouldn't pay back our bonds, or stuff like that, right? There was this huge quagmire of what to do with all these different financial instruments that had been created, and Alexander Hamilton was the one that said, accept them all. Yeah. And he got into power, and he accepted them all. And, Alexander Hamilton, this is a big one, the Whiskey Rebellion. Alexander Hamilton was the guy who was responsible for putting the tax on whiskey somewhere in like Pennsylvania, or wherever the hell it was, for rednecks out in the middle of nowhere, which my understanding was it was an incredibly tiny amount of tax. But so was the tax on tea, right? Which wasn't the thing that started the war, but it was kind of the spark that got things going, right? And the Whiskey Rebellion, they rebelled and said, no, we shouldn't have to pay this tax. And so George Washington, the hero, marches into wherever the hell it was. I said Pennsylvania, I'm not sure. And there wasn't any fighting, because once everybody saw the army, they went, we'll pay the tax. Alexander Hamilton was thrilled at this. And from an MMT perspective, I could totally understand why he needed that tax to make his money valuable. Why else would he care so much about getting some whiskey tax from some moonshiners out in the middle of nowhere?
Well, yeah, it's if you tax something that's in universal demand, especially, that's more powerful, right? That's what creates demand for that token.
Mm-hmm. Precisely. What was the next on your list?
So, okay, big picture point. Just we went off on a tangent, but yeah, if all taxes went away, banking system's still in place. If not, then we've seen in history that the money that is when we see hyperinflation. In fact, when there's no capacity to enforce the taxation regime. Another thing that came up was, okay, why are the reserves needed? And you never really went into the details. That reserves are needed.
I needed you there for that.
Well, because you said the taxes, and then they were talking
if I remember correctly, tax payments are made in reserves from the banks, right? From the banking system.
Yeah, but it's the account holders who are taxes, because they started talking about the banks. They have to pay taxes, and that's why the money has value. But no, first of all, reserves are needed to facilitate individual tax payments, interbank check clearing, and cash withdrawals. So those are the three events when reserves are needed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the bank needs to present reserves, have reserves to request cash from the central bank to make ATM payouts. Or if one bank, so if we're both at Bank of America, and I write you a Bank of America check, you deposit it, then the bank doesn't need reserves.
They just move numbers around on their own ledger.
Right, but if you pay someone at Wells Fargo, you write a check to someone at Wells Fargo, they deposit your BofA check, then Wells Fargo will go to BofA and request the equivalent amount in reserves. So that's what reserves are needed for these events: interbank check clearing, cash withdrawals, and tax payments made by individuals. Right. That's correct. Like you said, anytime somebody makes a tax payment, their reserve account is debited, and the
bank's reserve account is debited. Correct.
Bank's reserve account is debited, and then the money just disappears from the private sector for all practical purposes. It's just deleted from the private sector system, and okay. So this typical response that we see on occasion, but if somebody says, I don't need money because I want to pay taxes, I just need it because somebody else finds it valuable. Right. So that's an argument against the theory that taxation is the root drain on, basically the root cause of the valuation. This one lady was saying, no, I just need it because somebody else is going to accept it.
Right. Well, somebody else accepts it because it's taxed.
Well, and right, we're talking about systemic. Right, we're talking about the systemic reason, and not your own personal reason for why you happen to accept Bitcoin or dollars in your account.
Well, Bob Murphy actually said this to me in the debate that I had on the Tom Woods show, which I thought was the stupidest thing.
Right,
I was so stupid that he said this.
I understand that not everyone, but if you go back to why does the corporation accept the money? Well, because they need to pay taxes. All the corporations that get paid at the end of the day, they need to pay taxes on their profits and on their income in U.S. dollars, and on their payroll and on.
I want to bring up exactly what Bob Murphy said, because I think it does help elucidate the thing that the point that you're bringing up. Is he said that, Dylan, when you were young, I don't believe that you saved money because you had to fill out a tax return because you weren't filling out a tax return. Well, that's true. I wasn't filling out a tax return, say, when I was 12. However, when I went to the store and I bought something, there was sales tax on that, and that there were the money that the corporation and I mean, let's go back to what you just said. The money that corporation got, next payroll period, they had to pay payroll taxes.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then when the people got the money that they got paid at the end of the year, they had to file a tax return.
Right. The vast majority. The whole point is just that a significant majority of individuals have to pay this fee in this unit of account to this entity from time to time. That's enough. Doesn't mean everyone understands it even. Doesn't mean everyone does it. Everyone has a demand for that purpose. But a sufficient majority of people need to make this payment. Probably it's the most universal payment, the most universal service that people pay for in any given country, right? Yep. The tax payment. We all have to do it.
Well, and I think it's also worth pointing out. I've used it for momentum a couple times here. Is that if we compare the beginning of the country to where they had a problem getting people to accept Continentals because they weren't worth anything, versus now, well, at the beginning of the country, there's no system set up where people accept these things. Now we've got 250 years of a system set up where people accept these things, right?
Right.
So yes, there is a cultural aspect of this, or a social aspect of this, where it's like, okay, we all recognize that this money, does X, so we're going to keep going through those motions because I've used it my whole life and I'm familiar with it. Absolutely. But again, going back to the system, how did we come to that point to begin with? Through taxation.
Right. Taxation is the best way to start the origin story. And then, of course, if you have the power to do that, then you can also make loans, and then you can demand the loan repayment and enforce that, and then you have this whole banking system on top of the public finance system. That's how we have a monetary economy, basically.
Yes. If everybody who's watching this now or recording could like, share, and subscribe it helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
I hate saying it, but it's just true.